worked together before. We've been married for 17 years. And we go to Oshkosh every year since we got married, except one. But she's discovered ways to enjoy Oshkosh that are different from the ways I enjoy it, and this is part of what happened. So Patty Borrell.
Where do you want me to stand?
Anyone is comfortable for you out here somewhere, wherever you are.
I'd rather be behind the table.
That's why I knew. I forgot to say, Nacht Vixen is actually the German words for night witches. That's what Patty will explain all that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I don't do a lot of presenting, so it's going to be kind of open. So please feel free to ask questions at any time. And I love my cheering section here. So, okay, as Dick said, we go to Oshkosh every year. We've been going to Oshkosh for a long time. The last couple of years, we've gone for the entire week. We used to just go for a long weekend. So going for the whole week, it's like I need to find things to see and do there other than following him like to a 4-flight demonstration or, you know, how many airplanes can I look at? I love airplanes, but Dick wants to, you know, spend more time, which is fine. So I decided I needed to find activities, workshops, presentations that I might be interested in going to. So I got the app on my phone. So if you're going to go to Oshkosh, download their app. It's wonderful. It's got the whole schedule of everything, and there's a zillion things to look at. But I scrolled through, and I found some things that I thought would be interesting. So this year at Oshkosh, I did a number of different things. I did the Women Venture picture. All the women in aviation, I don't know, Elaine, if you've ever done that? It's really, really cool. They had, the whole plaza was filled with women in their t-shirts. Most of them are pilots. Now, I'm not a pilot, but I like to think of myself as a navigator. So, you know, so I felt like part of it. Anyhow, so I did that. I listened to the Wisconsin National Guard women helicopter pilots. They had a presentation, so it was really fun to hear what they're doing. And young women, so it was just really fun. I went to the Air Race Classic booth. Last year, the Air Race Classic went through Mankato, and Dick and I went down there to see the pilots land and take off, and it was really kind of fun. So visiting with them, and they were showing us the route for this year, and it goes somewhere. Owatonna, yeah, I was gonna say somewhere that we could, yeah, that we could go and watch that. It's women air racing, so it's just kind of a cool thing. The 99s, I stopped at their booth, and I talked to them because at GMAC one year, I did the pinch hitter program with the 99s, and I talked to them at Oshkosh. I said, you guys should offer that program at Oshkosh. And they were confused because apparently there's 2 different programs. The one that you guys did here was a seminar, which I thought was wonderful. It helped women understand better, you know, what's going on when your pilot is flying, so you can understand the controls. It isn't something that, you know, that I would be able to land the plane, but I would understand the controls better. Anyhow, they also have a program where they put you in a plane, and they said they couldn't do that at Oshkosh. But the one that you guys did here, they could. So anyhow, maybe. And then the Night Witches of World War II. I'm looking through the thing going, what is the Night Witches of World War II? I didn't really know anything about it. So found the presentation on the app, and I couldn't believe it. I, as a lovely grandmother, I have a book club with my granddaughters. And I had been looking for, because the granddaughters are getting a little bit older, maybe some aviation type books, stories about planes or pilots or something that the girls might be interested in because their grandpa is a pilot. So I'm scrolling through, and I found the Night Witches of World War II. And I looked at it, and I looked at the book, and it's like, it's not really right for the girls to read. But I had it on my Amazon wish list just because I thought I might read it someday. And then I couldn't believe I saw that on the app. So as soon as I saw it on the EAA app, I thought, I got to get this book. So I ordered the book. I read the book before we went to Oshkosh. And then I went to the presentation. So ordered the book. I marked the event so I wouldn't miss it. Okay, now the presentation was given by Dr. Leo Murphy, who I didn't know. He is from the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And I didn't really know anything about him, but I went to the museum theater to go to the presentation. And apparently, his presentations are like super wonderful. Everybody is there. Because I didn't think anybody knew anything about night witches of World War II. I mean, it's like, who would know about these things? So the theater was totally and completely full, but I got a seat. So I was really happy about that. Dick actually went to it with me. So we got to the theater and we watched his presentation. Now, the presentation that he gave, he didn't talk about this book, and this book is actually fairly new. I think it's from 2022, so it's a fairly new book. But he was talking a lot about night witches, and his presentation was crazy. So you can go to the next slide if you want. There's lots of slides here, but they just show them in the night sky. So anyhow, so my presentation is based on this book and on what he said, kind of a combination, and what I found interesting about it all. Okay, first of it, what I thought was interesting was the history of women in combat. Now, women have almost always had a part in the wars. Starting since World War I, they were nurses. We all know that. They did all those types of things. The British women, more towards World War II time now, they had anti-aircraft units, but they were non-combat. They were brought in to free up the men so that the men could be in combat roles. And they would spot enemy aircraft, they would set range, load ammunition, and then let the men fire the guns. So, the German women, again, very, very similar, anti-aircraft units, searchlight units, and the Germans really strongly encouraged their women that they didn't want to be gun women like those Soviets. That was not good. And of course, we know about the American women. We had the Women's Air Corps, the WAC, and then we also had the WASPs, the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, and they would fly planes between bases for the men. The WASPs were actually discontinued when 38 female pilots lost their lives. So, then Soviet women, they also had the traditional auxiliary roles, factory workers, drivers, nurses, and they had 3 regiments of bomber pilots, which is like amazing. It's like, why would they have all these things? Okay, next part, we had a little bit of history of women in the wars, their roles there, but then a little bit of history of the Soviet women and the history of the Soviet Union a little bit, which to me was very interesting. One of the things that I thought was so interesting about all of this is that we forget that the Soviets were our allies during World War II. Because right now we don't think of the Russians, the former Soviets, as being allies of ours. But at that point they were. So it's interesting how history changes our perspectives on people and nations. Anyhow, history of Soviet women. The Lenin era. In 1917, the Russian Revolution brought the Marxist-Leninist Bolsheviks. Okay? And at this time, all the restrictive laws around divorce, abortion, cohabitation, homosexuality, all those things were overturned. Okay? The country was very progressive with more equality between the sexes. Women even had the right to vote. Kind of amazing. This was mostly for the upper class women. But for about 20 years, women had freedom. And women learned how to fly at that point too. So there was a number of women that learned how to be pilots. Well, then in comes Stalin in 1936. He comes into control. And he rolled back many of those policies. And he put women back in the home. Okay? But some of these women were still pilots. In 1941, beginning of the war, the Operation Barbarossa, and I don't know if you've ever heard about this, but we'll talk a little bit about it. It was launched by the Nazis against the Soviets. Now, Stalin and Hitler had an agreement that they weren't going to fight each other. They were going to just divide up the lands together. But Hitler went back on his word and decided to attack the Soviets anyway. So Stalin realized he needed more help to fight the Nazis. And that's where these women stepped in. So we can go to the next slide. This is Marina Razkova. She is kind of the founder, the original emphasis behind the Night Witches. She was already a record-setting pilot. She had done many different things before the war had started because she had been one of those upper-class women that had learned to fly earlier. She had benefited from the more progressive policies of Lenin. She taught other women to fly. She attempted a record-setting flight. Her plane went down. She was separated from her crew and spent 2 weeks in the Siberian tundra surviving. So she was a tough woman. Okay? She was an incredible pilot, and Stalin liked her. So she was able to continue as a pilot. He was putting the women back in their homes, but there was a few, that he thought, well, these women can do this. So at the time of Operation Barbarossa, you can move on to the next one. This is just going to show some planes. She was able to convince the military officers that her female pilot friends could help the country. Okay? She recruited thousands of women. These are just pictures of the planes that we've had. Leave it there for a minute. She recruited thousands of women and began training. More women were added later. These women were enlisted and trained during the winter of 1941-42. So it was cold up there. And many were pilots, but there were also mechanics, drivers, technicians, navigators. If you go back to the previous picture, you can see the plane that they're in. It's an open cockpit, and it was winter when they were training. So these women were tough. Okay. So they formed 3 regiments of pilots, navigators, and ground crew, and they started training during the winter. You can go forward, yeah. There's a lot of pictures here of the women. They had to use leftover uniforms and boots. Many were too big for the women, and they also trained in the older airplanes. It was the PO2s. At the end of the presentation, Dick will share more about the planes. They did not get the newer planes that the Soviet men were flying. They were flying planes left over from World War I. And they trained in the winter, mostly at night. So they became proficient at night navigation. They were determined women. They were fighting for their country, their children, their homeland. They were definitely dedicated. Okay, the night witches. There's a whole bunch of pictures here. You can continue with the next one if you want. Mechanics. We have a pilot and a navigator. Okay, what their mission was, you can leave it there, Dick. Their mission was to fly over the German camps at night and drop bombs. Okay? This drove the German soldiers crazy because then they couldn't sleep because these things would be happening at night. They had to stay awake to be ready. The Germans had to stay awake to be ready for bombs dropping at that point, and they didn't know when it was going to happen. The women would set up a base about 10 miles from where the Germans were, fly over them at night, and then go back and dismantle that base and go back to their original base all in one night. So they were working at night, okay? For a period, the Germans didn't know who it was that was bombing them. But what would happen is the planes, they would power down and glide down over the German camp. And it sounded like a whispering or whistling of a broom. It felt like a broom, swishing down in there. So they called them witches. And when they found out they were women, they called them witches, the night witches. And they said it as a bad term. But the Russian women, the German or the Soviet women, they thought that was pretty cool that they were the night witches. So they were okay with that. Okay, and then let's see. Yeah, they would have to swoop down in with the power off. They would have to navigate without radios because they were trying to not make any noise. So these women really became really, really good pilots. They had a pilot and a navigator, and the navigator would take them to where they needed to go. And so, yeah, pretty amazing. They flew many, many, many missions. One woman, Serafina Amasova, she flew over 550 attacks, all at night. So it was pretty amazing. Lilia Lichtovic was a young woman, only 20 years old at the start of the war. She was known as the White Rose of Stalingrad, one of the deadliest pilots, because apparently she was pretty accurate with her dropping of the bombs. Alexandra Akimova was a navigator and recounted how she would sit behind the pilot in the biplane. She would navigate to the correct spot, aim the bomb, drop it, and then navigate back to safety all at night without any communication between, they weren't using radios or anything. The biplanes could glide, so the pilot would throttle down the engine and drift while the navigator aimed and dropped bombs. Then fire up the engines and get the heck out of there. So these women were very heroic. Many of them lost their lives. Marina Raskova, the original founder woman, she died in 1943 in a plane crash. So, she didn't even survive a couple years after all this started. She was awarded the Order of the Patriotic War, First Class, posthumously. They also named a ship after her, too. This is another Gold Star Award winner. I'm not sure what her name was. That might be that Lilia gal that was the White Rose of Stalingrad. Because the Soviet Union didn't want to recognize so many of them, their part of the history was pretty much left untold. It was kind of an untold story until the fall of the Soviet Union, and then people were allowed to go in and share these stories. They were definitely amazing women. They put them on postage stamps. It's pretty cool. So yeah, do we have more pictures there, or is that about the end? Oh, Dick will get to this part. So I have the book, wonderful book. I got it on Amazon. I don't think it was $10, whatever. It was a great book. And my takeaway from all of this is that it's really cool to learn about different parts of the history of aviation, of women, of all of this. And I can't wait to see what Oshkosh is going to have next year. So go to Oshkosh. Have fun.
So I asked Patty if she wouldn't mind telling a little bit about the airplanes, and she said, that's more up your alley. So if you can even pronounce this, it's the Polikarpov PO2, okay? They produced it after World War I, and from 28 to 32 is the most produced biplane in history, with over 30,000 produced. So it's crew of two, the pilot and observers. It was a bomber in the case of the Night Witches, but also could have been a gunner. Wingspan was 37 feet 5 inches, 26 feet 11 long. And I thought interesting, about 1,700 pounds empty weight, just about 3,000 pounds loaded for almost a 1,300 pound useful load. Way better than my Cessna 172. The engine was a 5-cylinder, I can't even pronounce it, but Schwetzka, M11P, 5-cylinder air-cooled radial, produced 125 horsepower, quite a little machine. Carry up to 610-pound bombs. Cruise speed 68, max speed 94, range 390 miles. Now understand, these ladies would fly sometimes 15 missions, 10 miles and back, 10 miles and back every night. The thousands of missions over the 3 years they were flying. Range 390, ceiling 9,800 feet. I'm pretty sure they never got up to 9,800 feet. Any questions? Thank you very much. I think, it was...
No question, just a comment. I was privileged to start flying in the 80s and was able to meet a number of the WASP. And when I went to an international conference in San Diego, it happened at the same time. The Night Witches and the WASP had a joint conference together.
Wow.
So I wish they would have recorded that, because it was just fascinating to see those ladies together, the history they had.
Right, because a lot of the women survived and went on. And the book here talks more in depth about some of the women, what they did after the war. So yeah, it was pretty impressive. So.
How we got into the presentation was I went to the presentation before that about the nuclear silos, and I wouldn't leave my seat. And I kept saying, "Now I'm saving down for my wife. I'm saving down for my wife." When she came in, I went, "Sit down." Well, thank you. Very, very attentive. I hope you enjoyed it.
That was great.